Thanks. My name's Tim. I'm an alcoholic. Uh, if you can't if you can't hear me at any point, just start pointing at your ear as though I'm mad or you're mad. That will do the trick. Uh, if only one of you points at your ear, we'll know it's you, not me. Um, so I'm not an expert on anything, but I have some experience with the concepts. If that's useful to you, wonderful. And if it's not, well, there we have it. Now, with the concepts, just like with the steps, you've got the short form on page 59, and the long form of how to actually do the step is presented on through many chapters of the big book. With the traditions, we have a short form and we have a long form. With the concepts, also, we have a short form and a long form, and I hate to break it to you in America, but we have our own concepts in Great Britain. They're slightly different. We've got a different legal structure. Um, uh, Firstly, because our company law and charity law is different, and secondly, because we're concerned only with Great Britain, we're not concerned with world services. So the concepts are written differently. Just a historical curious footnote: it's Great Britain, not the United Kingdom. Northern Ireland, for the purposes of Alcoholics Anonymous, is already united with the Republic of Ireland. Let's not go into further details about that. But so it's the concept in Great Britain. I'm going today to read the World Service long form, which I think is the same as the World Service short form, according to my sheet of paper, if that's correct. The final responsibility and ultimate authority for AA World Services should always reside in the collective conscience of our whole fellowship. Now, before I go into my experience on Concept 1 or my thoughts on Concept 1, by the way, anything I say has not been devised by me. I've learnt it from someone else or I've read it somewhere. So all I'm doing is collating this material. I'm delivering it. I didn't originate any of it. So let's go back right to the beginning. Again, I'm not an AA historian. There are people who are. Go and, if you'd rather listen to Gail, just go and get Gail. She's very good on history. But a little bit of history is requisite here. And so you got AA starting in 1935, a ragtaggle bunch of alcoholics. In 1938, they founded something. This is so typical of Bill. Something as grand sounding as the Alcoholic Foundation. It's like the Bill Gates and Melinda Gates Foundation. Very, very ambitious sounding. Anyway, 1938, the Alcoholic Foundation was created as a trusteeship for AA as a whole. And 16 years later, in 1954, it was renamed the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous. So by 1954, it had a name that we're still familiar with today. And I'm going to read a little quotation which explains why this trusteeship is there anyway, as opposed to simply sitting there in our groups and doing what we do in our groups and just ignoring any higher matters. So this is the quotation. This trusteeship was designed to inaugurate and maintain all of those special services for AA as a whole that could not well be performed by single groups or areas. So you can see there are things that you can only do if the groups get together. So you don't want each group writing its own basic textbook and publishing it. You want the groups to get together and do one between them. So far, so good. We envisioned the writing of a uniform AA literature, the development of a sound public relations policy. So that's how AA relates to the outside world. and a means of handling the large numbers of pleas for help that might follow in the wake of national and international publicity. So still today, you've got people whose doctor or maiden aunt or psychiatrist or parole officer says, "Have you thought of AA?" And they need a way of getting in touch with AA. How do they find the local group? Who knows? But there's a central way of contacting AA. We thought in terms of aiding new groups to form. So that's another purpose of this whole thing, is to give them a starter pack, as it were, guidelines on how to start a group, and of furnishing them with counsel based on the experience of the older and already successful groups. So it's to provide channels of communication between groups. We thought there would be a need for a monthly magazine and also for translations of our literature into other languages. Now, this was written in the 1950s, I think, that paragraph. And what's so interesting is it pretty much covers what the General Service Board of AA in Great Britain does today. In terms of aiding new groups to form, the GSB of AA in Great Britain, I know over recent years has done a lot of work and poured a lot of funds into helping establish AA in certain parts of Eastern Europe, Ukraine and Moldova, Sub-Saharan Africa as well. It oversees translations as well. So all of these activities are still ongoing. So it's pretty obvious that those activities are going to need some kind of central coordination. You can't have that just left to individual groups to talk to each other. There are 4,500 AA groups in the United Kingdom. There are vastly more in the United States. Now, going back to 1938, you've got the Alcoholic Foundation on one hand, which handles all these highfalutin activities, and then you've got these scattered groups in between. And how did they communicate? Well, really, they communicated via Bill and Bob. They were the linchpins of the whole system. And as they perceived rightly their impending mortality, they thought, we need something to replace us. And so the structure, the so-called conference structure of Alcoholics Anonymous, is the system for linking my individual home group in Hoxton in London with the various structures and operatives who handle public relations and literature and outreach to other parts of the world and the phone lines and all of that. That's the purpose of it, because you need some kind of structure in between. So that's why we even have concepts in the first place. In terms of organization, there was a lot of opposition to the establishment of a structure, in particular the establishment of a conference structure to represent AA and then oversee what the General Service Board did and does. There was a lot of opposition, with people saying, let's keep it simple. And if ever you want to shut down an argument in AA without providing any substantive grounds, all you have to do is say, keep it simple, and then look askance at the person that's promoting some sort of idea as though they're an idiot for using their minds. So now, of course, one must keep it simple. This is a valuable slogan, but I'm pretty opinionated, I'm afraid. So if you don't like that, hard luck. I'm just one person. I don't represent AA, so I'm allowed to say what I want. So keeping it simple is good, but not to the point of idiocy. I've been to meetings where if you mention the steps, you're told off for not keeping it simple. If you mention the higher power, you're told off for not keeping it simple. Now, if you want a principle for treading the fine line between um, idiotic simplicity and Byzantine complexity, it's found in tradition 9, sorry. And a great slogan is this: we are uh, we're no more organized than necessary, but no less organized than necessary either. So we have as much organization as is necessary, but as little as possible. So it's like that push me, pull you animal in Dr. Dolittle, which is pointing in two directions. And so these are opposing aims, and if you balance the two, you'll be fine. As little organization as possible, but as much as necessary. So if you think about how the AA groups operate, these really provide a template for the concepts. Actually, before I get onto that, there's one more thing I want to say about why we've even got concepts in the first place. So we've got two things here. We've got a structure, fair enough, and then we've got concepts which govern how that structure works, and establish the principle, some very, very detailed principles on occasion for how that structure works. And now I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Over many years, I got sober in 1993. Or I was gotten sober. I was last separated from alcohol in 1993, and I wasn't happy about it, let me tell you. By separated from alcohol, I mean the policeman literally took the bottle from my hand. Okay, so that's what being separated from alcohol means. I'd had the foresight to drink almost everything in the bottle, so it wasn't the greatest sacrifice, but nonetheless. Anyway, back to the point. Um, there's another fellowship. Um, I can't say the name of the fellowship or I'll get into the most frightful trouble. But I've talked to a lot of, it's a new fellowship. It's been going for X years, but it's one of the much newer fellowships. And as that was developing in a country somewhere, as they were getting to 10, 15, 20 groups, they wanted to write literature, of course. They wanted a website. They wanted to do all sorts of things. And the head honcho, so the person who'd started the whole thing, if ever you've started a group, you'll know how dangerous it is to be the person that started a group. You patrol the group like a teacher with a ruler, just ready to slap people's knuckles if they get it wrong. The head honcho of this fellowship was a lovely chap, and he did a huge amount of good, but he was very, very opposed to adopting the concepts. He didn't like them at all. He said, what do we need concepts for? There are only 15 to 20 groups. Let's keep it simple. Now, the thing is, it's no good saying, well, we don't like this set of principles, because you've got to operate in accordance with something. So there's no such, you can't do anything on a computer without an operating system. Fellowships are like that. If they don't have the operating system of the concepts, they're going to have another operating system. You can't do anything without it. So you're going to have one. The question is only, which operating system are we going to use? Whether or not you have one is not a question. Groups are the same. If a group does not operate by the traditions, it's going to operate by something. If an individual does not operate by the steps, they're going to operate by something. Now, when I didn't have the steps, I operated on fear and prejudice and greed and grasping and all sorts of other principles. They're principles. They're not great principles, but they are principles. So the default, if you don't, in my view, if you don't willingly sign up to the set of principles established by the higher power as expressed in the steps, then you're going to default back to the ego's operating system. Now, let's not go into detail about that. Fascinating, that's maybe another talk. Groups, if they don't operate in accordance with the traditions, you know what happens. I mean, you're way ahead of me here. They operate in accordance with the personalities of the individuals who have the most unresolved issues in the group. So principles before personalities. It's not that there isn't a place for personalities in AA. I know you've probably been to meetings, as have I, where it's a bit like the Stepford Wives, where everyone says the same thing every week and looks very shifty. If someone says something new, very uncomfortable. The temperature in the room drops. So some personality. I like some personality in AA. But it's it's principles before personalities, not principles instead of personalities, principles before personalities. So if a group is not run in accordance with the traditions, it will be run in accordance with the personalities of the uh, the most erring members of the group. And fellowships are much the same. If they're not run in accordance with the concepts, and I've seen this firsthand on a small scale in AA, you see little skirmishes occasionally. But I've seen this in other fellowships where the concepts are either not adopted at all, or they're adopted, but no one knows anything about them. They're kind of on the wall. Um, but no one knows what to do with them. So people are still operating in accordance with personality. If you get your steps off the wall as opposed to the book, you'll have an off the wall program. And fellowships are much the same. If they operate just by, you just got the concepts on the wall, but you don't understand them, then you have the same problem. And what is amazing to me, I've seen this with fellowship after fellowship after fellowship with people I sponsor in various fellowships other than AA. I've got more than one problem, let me tell you. I've seen it again and again and again. People in each fellowship want to find a way to do things other than using the concepts, and only when every other method is exhausted, finally people say, oh, I suppose we'll have to use those wretched concepts in the end. And they start using them and everything calms down. So the steps are there to stop me killing myself. The traditions are there to stop me killing other people. And the concepts are there for us all to not kill each other. They're there to prevent collective self-destruction. So anyway, if you think about how the group operates, in tradition 2, there's this notion that within the group, it is the higher power that is in charge, speaking through the conscience of the members of the group. Now, how that happens, the mechanism is this. The group is a spiritual entity, and for a group to operate as a spiritual entity, that's from tradition 5. The individuals in the group have got to sign up to tradition 1, which means putting the group just a tiny little bit ahead of themselves. And there's a line by, I think it's St. John Chrysostom, where he says, when 2 or more are gathered in my name, this is referring to God. When two or more are gathered in my name, then God's Spirit comes amongst you. And there's a Jewish notion that 2 people can carry a heavier item than the sum of what either of them could carry on their own. So the group is something is the more than the sum of its parts of the members. And when that's invoked, when that's created, when a bunch of people are there for a common purpose, the higher power, in my experience, seems to speak more clearly through the individual conscience of those individuals at the group conscience meeting. So you've got to have a few elements to have a successful group conscience. And success in AA, I think, here's a great little trio of words. Effective, efficient, and harmonious. You've got to get the job done. You've got to not make too big a deal out of it. So you minimal use of resources, get the job done as efficiently as possible, and harmoniously. Try not to hack off everyone in the process. There's a little saying, uh, this is something Texans say. I care more about whether you live or die than about your feelings. Now, when push comes to shove, that's true. My friend Louise, she's from Texas, although she's originally a French Canadian. Although maybe if you're originally a French Canadian, I think you're always a French Canadian, even if you live in Texas for 50 years. But she said you might as well tell them the truth because they're going to die anyway. However, if if you can get the truth through to someone without hurting them, without upsetting them, it's just better. They're more likely to come back for more if they don't notice the injection going in. So effective and efficient and harmonious. So for an effective and efficient and harmonious group conscience, you've got to have those ideas in place. There's got to be a common purpose. People have got to be signed up to that common purpose in tradition one, putting personal interests a close second. And then you've got to be in the room. It's no good trying to have a group conscience by email or WhatsApp or Facebook group. I'm just going to leave that there. Just no back channels. Do it in the room so you've got the human beings in front of you. You can just about do it online in Zoom and similar platforms. It's not quite as good, but that's as close as we can get, I think, at the moment. So that's the notion of who's in charge of the group. God is, if the other conditions are met. So you see, concept one is a little bit naughty, because it says the final responsibility and the ultimate authority for AA World Services should always reside in the collective conscience of our whole fellowship. Now, the unwritten part of that is, what is the collective conscience of our whole fellowship? It's some kind of unified force which lies beyond the physical bodies of the people in AA. It's a spiritual entity, in the same way that a group is a spiritual entity, invoked in the same way by the common purpose in Tradition 5 and the voluntary adherence to Tradition 1, which places the common welfare first, which means God is in charge. I know I'm going to repeat some stuff I said in the Traditions talks, but there we go. There we have it. Spiritual Paul once asked me, who are the founders of AA? And who founded AA? And I knew this was a trick question, but I went for it anyway. I said, Paul, Bill, and Bob were the founders of AA. And he said, no, 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 no. They were the co-founders of AA. God was the founder of AA. And it's the same idea as here. God's in charge. I saw something the other day on Facebook, which I shouldn't look at Facebook, but I do. But I've unfollowed almost everyone, so I've now detoxified it. Basically pictures of rabbits and things by rabbis. Rabbits and rabbis, those are the two things that I get on my Facebook feed. One of them was this wonderful thing: relax, nothing is under control. Now, what that means is nothing is under control by me, but it is under control by the higher power. Now, there are some theological questions in there. If you don't believe that, if you believe there are two equal and opposite forces in the universe, good and evil, and they're fighting things out in some kind of Marvel comics-like way, then fine. Let's not argue about that. But let's just proceed on the premise that God is in charge. That's how I'm going to proceed here. Feel free to just leave the room if that's not what you believe and you don't want to listen to this side. So, God is in charge of the whole thing, but God can't answer telephones, apparently. Or maybe God can, but is currently choosing not to. I guess if God can speak through a burning bush, God can answer a telephone. But, there we go. The data currently suggests that doesn't happen very often. So God is in charge but can't answer the phone. Um, God needs our physical forms to do that. And so the concepts produce a ladder down the upside down pyramid of AA. AA is described as an upside down pyramid, where you've got the members at the top, which is the broadest element of the pyramid, and then each layer further down, districts and areas. In Great Britain, you've got intergroups and regions. The terminology is different. Um, each layer you go down is smaller, so that's why it's an upside down pyramid as opposed to just a sort of block. But above the whole thing is the higher power, and that's that notion of God being in charge of everything is actually there in tradition 12. So I'm not making this up, you know. So in the upside down pyramid, the purpose, if God has final responsibility and ultimate authority, that's got to be delegated down the ladder to the people at the other end of the chain who are literally writing the AA literature, who are literally responding to incoming requests from members of parliament to attend an event. Um, that's all the concepts are, is a chain of authority, a chain of responsibility and authority, enabling God's will to go through the system to the hands and feet and mouths at the end of the people who are doing the work. And so that this isn't like bowling, where um, sometimes you knock all the skittles down. I think they're called skittles. Sometimes you knock all the skittles down. Sometimes the ball goes into the guttering on one side or the other. My sponsor reliably informs me that when kids have a birthday party and go bowling, they put balloons in the guttering so that if the ball is going to one side or the other and the kid whose birthday it is about to lose, it bounces off the balloons and he hits all the skittles anyway. Um, so the balloons in the guttering are the concepts. They're there to make sure that when God bowls the ball at the top, all the skittles get hit at the bottom. If you have the concepts in place, the job's probably going to get done effectively and efficiently and harmoniously. And when the concepts work, they stop us from killing everyone. So some ideas here. It talks about the whole fellowship, the collective conscience of our whole fellowship. That means, I know it sounds like an obvious thing to say, but it's a point that could get missed. I mean, it's all there to read in black and white, but somehow I miss things. That means the fellowship must be whole. Now, this is a controversial point. Um, there are there's a bit of branding going on in AA. I was asked to speak a while ago at an event. I better not say exactly what it was, but I thought it was going to be an AA meeting online, and a particular big book AA meeting. And it became apparent that I hadn't gone through I'm a big book person. That's what I use to do the steps, blah, blah, blah. But it became apparent that I hadn't gone through the big book with the precise methodology that was used by this particular group, which is hooked up with other groups around the country and around the world, which use the same workbook or method or something. All big book, but different methods. And it's branded. There's a branding associated with it. There's a workbook that you can mail $15 in the post to get. It's separate. To me, it's separation. I'm an AA member. Wherever I go, I want to be able to tell my story. If your story's different, that's all right. If you did it differently, that's all right. Normally, I would be in New Hampshire at this time of the year. And if you ever go to a big book meeting in New Hampshire and you look up in the book, it says big book. I went to a big book meeting in Gonick, gonic in sounds like something that small children suffer from, doesn't it? In New Hampshire. And where I walked in and we said, "Is this big book step study?" And they looked horrified. I said, "No, no, 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 it's fine. You're fine." Because with Big Book Step Study, if you have, that's one of those movements where if you haven't gone through it their way, there are these little tests to see if you know the terminology. You're not allowed to share. Fine, they can do what they want. I mean, a group is a group. They can have, but to me, it breaches the principle of being one fellowship that any AA member can go anywhere, tell their story, and be thanked for it rather than shut down. So to have a whole fellowship, it's got to be unified, and it doesn't mean we all have to be the same, but I think we all have to get along, and to get along, we can disagree, but we can respect other people's right to do what they're doing, but not shut them out because of it. I think that's where the line is, and that's where when I start an AA group, or when the question is what to call this group, um, um, it does. I I always aim for the group to do two things: to say where it is, which tells people where it is, and what it's going to talk about. If it's a step meeting, it's a step meeting. If it's a big book meeting, if it's a meditation meeting, it's a if it's step 11 meeting, it's a step 11 meeting. And to avoid those little branding catchphrases, back to basics, primary purpose, big book awakening, big book step study, all of those branding things. Because if I have a home group, I want it to just be open to everyone. I don't want it to be a little sect within AA. So little hobby horse over there. Um, what else? It's this notion of a single purpose as well. I think this is what makes for a single fellowship. Um, and a good example of that single purpose and single spirit. I'm sure maybe you've experienced it yourself, but maybe you've heard someone say, "Well, I went to a meeting in Mexico and I didn't understand a word, but I understood everything." And I think that's an expression of it being a whole fellowship, that there is what Bill W. calls the language of the heart. So this collective conscience, what does it say? Should reside in the collective conscience, the collective conscience, not a collective conscience, the collective conscience of our whole fellowship. If concept one says there's the collective conscience, I guess it must be there. So let's just treat that as existing. Treat this spiritual web connecting everyone as being real. Any group conscience meeting of an individual group which is looking at a topic which affects the fellowship as a whole. So we have a conference process. The conference steering committee sends out lots of questions to groups for how what do you think of this new pamphlet? What do you think of this new poster? What do you think about how are we going to help ethnic minorities more? How are we going to help people who have hearing difficulties or eyesight difficulties to access AA more effectively? These questions, they get discussed in groups and then passed down the chain. Exactly how that chain works we'll discover in the other concepts. But when that's discussed, the aim of the group, in my view, should be to see itself as part of that collective conscience, rather than a private lobbying group wanting to foist its own views on the rest of the fellowship. So in the same way that the individual is part, I subsume myself within the group conscience in a group conscience meeting. I am suppress my own personal views and or at least have those come second. It's the same when a group is holding a group conscience as part of that collective conscience. It's subsumed within it. And it's that collective conscience is by its nature beyond the material realm, but it's accessed through the material realm of the group conscience meeting, almost like a seance. That's really, in a spooky sort of sense, that's what a group conscience is. You're accessing, you're creating a venue in which you access a higher realm. With group conscience meetings, circles really help. Just saying, because they create a physical space, with no one walking across, no one crossing sight lines. Anyway, um, so what's behind this collective conscience? The answer is in tradition to God and through the individual step 11. So there's a fundamental linkage between the individual step 11, the group's tradition 2, and the fellowship's concept 1. The concept 12 quotation, by the way, we shall forever live in thankful contemplation of him who presides over us all. So there we go. Doesn't have to be a hymn, it's just a linguistic device. Okay. Certainly in my particular tradition, it's very, you say every morning as if to remind yourself, God doesn't have a body or anything which looks like a body. So just don't even go there. That's something we have to repeat to ourselves. So God is not male or female. What else? So Bill, bless him, he liked to use different words to mean the same thing. So we've got strange mental blank spot and peculiar mental twist. Now there is a subtle difference between those two, but essentially they're the same thing. We've got twists of character, we've got defects of character, we've got shortcomings. 3, they all basically mean the same thing. And Bill does this all the way through the concepts. And if you're wise to what he's doing, it simplifies the whole thing. And he talks about final responsibility and ultimate authority. Final is the same as ultimate. Responsibility and authority overlap, or rather are very, very closely linked. And what I'm about to say, when I was told this, it made the whole concepts fall into place. So, in my life, there are 2 things I'm interested in. I'm supposed to be interested in. The first thing is knowledge of God's will for me, step 11, and the power to carry that out, step 11, which reiterates the principle on page 63 that if I stay close to God and perform his work well, then I'll get everything I need. So my focus needs to be only on God, what do you want me to do today? God, please give me the resources, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, social, developmental, material to do that. So you're after, if you're driving somewhere, you need a notion of where you're going to go, and you need a fully functional vehicle with petrol in the engine to get there. And so this idea in step 11 of knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out magically reflects the notions of responsibility and authority. Responsibility is the equivalent of knowledge of God's will for us, the things we're responsible for doing, the tasks, the objectives, the outcomes, the goals, the means. Authority is the power to carry that out, and power requires resources. So responsibility is knowledge of God's will for the fellowship. Authority is the power to carry out that will. And you've got to have, and this is a little bit of concept 12, but it's concept 10 rather, but it's necessary at this point. Concept 10 says if you want responsibility, you've got to have authority. If you want authority, you've got to have responsibility. They've got to be in equal measure. So starting with responsibility and authority at the top of the pyramid with God presiding above it, that responsibility and authority gets delegated down in equal measure, layer by layer through the fellowship. And the reason those have to go together is pretty obvious when you look at your own experience of knowledge of God's will for you and the power to carry that out. So if you've got power, but you have no idea what to do, you're stuck. If you know what to do, but you don't have the power to do it, you're stuck. So responsibility without authority is powerlessness. Authority without responsibility is self-will run riot or unmanageability. So you need to have both. And so they're intrinsically linked. One thing which will free up your whole afternoon is applying concept one in your life. I try and remember to do this as often as possible. I'll tell you how. Because the final responsibility and ultimate authority lie with the higher power expressing itself through the group conscience of the collective conscience of AA as a whole. I don't have final responsibility and ultimate authority for anything, which means I don't have to worry. If I'm worrying, I'm assuming final responsibility and ultimate authority. In fact, I'm sitting in God's seat. Now, God's not angry. I don't have the power to ruin God's whole day. I'm not that powerful. But if I'm sitting in God's seat, I'm in the way. I'm my own human shield. So I need to get out of it and recognize whatever my endeavor, God parachutes me in to situations to perform tasks on his behalf. And then get the hell out of Dodge. Don't stay there staring, seeing if it's worked, trying to work out what the point of this whole endeavor is in the blueprint for creation. No. Just get in there, do the job, get out. What's the next job? Get in there, do the job, get out. And don't look for gratitude. Don't look for results. You might need to monitor the results to feed back to the higher power, but not to trip. Nothing is on my own account. Everything is on God's account. So let's see what else we've got here. So far, what we've got with concept one is the notion that God is in charge of everything. God's got some kind of blueprint. And the responsibility and the authority needs to get delegated down, and it's going to get expressed through the group conscience. Now, when we get on to concept two, we're going to look specifically at how those individual groups holding group conscience meetings, how they can effectively operate as a collective conscience of the whole fellowship. And that's what concept two and some other of the structural concepts are going to be about. But the short version is this. The groups have GSRs. The GSR is the representative of the group. The GSRs get together in districts or areas or intergroups or regions, and then they elect representatives, and eventually you end up with a conference which, through the chain, represents the collective consciousness of the whole fellowship at a very, very concrete level. It brings the group conscience of all of these different groups into the same room at the same time, voting on a particular issue and getting to a point in concept 12, discussion, vote, substantial unanimity. So this is how it works in practice, and the rest of the concepts are going to be about that. So what this practically means is that when conference is going to start deciding stuff on behalf of the whole of AA, groups need to be informed about that. So whatever the structure is in the country you're in, you need to make sure that you are on the receiving end in your group of information sent out by conference through whatever structure is available, that the questions which you're asked to decide on behalf of the fellowship are forwarded to everyone in your group, that you set aside plenty of time, that don't have a group conscience immediately after the meeting when everyone wants to get home and have their tea. It's not going to allow the topics time to breathe. Have a business meeting then, because that will ensure the business gets done. But a group conscience meeting needs to be allowed to breathe. And you need a GSR. And the GSR needs to be someone who can feel what is going on in the group, can feel the can gather together all the views and subsume them into a single pot of ideas that he carries or she carries further down the structure to the next level. What else? For the fellowship to be whole, everyone has to participate. Now, that's never going to happen. But as with everything else in AA, these are ideals towards which we're willing to grow. So that's the aim, is to have everyone participate. And the GSR needs to turn up at the various assemblies, or the chain is broken. If the chain is broken at one point, the whole chain is broken. And that's why the GSR is so crucially important. And then it feeds back. So after conference, all of the information must feed back to groups through the conference report, the annual report of the General Service Board, so that this is an ongoing circuit of information and presentation of views and feedback. And we're going to cover more of that in Concept 3. I was introduced to the idea many years ago that when it says in step 12, we're to practice these principles in all our affairs, the these refers to the principles contained within the 12 steps. So it's recursive. Step 12 includes itself within itself. All of the 12 steps are included in that practice these principles. But and this is the genius of the way it was written. It's almost as though there was a divine hand behind the writing of the traditions. It's almost as though that is the case. It works pretty well to interpret it like this. These principles refers not only to the principles contained in the steps, but the principles contained in the traditions and the concepts. Because in the same way that an acorn contains the full blueprint for the oak tree, so if you look through the early writings of AA from 1935 to 1938, actually every single principle contained in the concepts can be traced directly or indirectly, sometimes a little bit obscurely, but can be traced back to those early ideas. If you look at the preface, I think it's the preface, has got the germs of the sorry, the preface or the first forward has got the germs of the traditions in it, and it makes for a very good preamble to a meeting. Actually, just livens things up. Although it can give the impression to newcomers that there are only 100 people in AA, but that's a different question. Maybe miss out that line. But the practicing these principles in all our affairs means, to me, practicing the steps, the traditions, and the concepts. And the concepts are the gifts that keep on giving. So the steps are the basic framework, and the traditions and the concepts flesh out the traditions, how I relate to other people, and the concepts, how I get God's will done in my life without getting my arms and legs yanked off by the world. Okay, so I like to apply the traditions in my life as well. I like to apply the concepts in my life because I know which side my bread is buttered. And looking at what is my relationship to God, to that final responsibility and ultimate authority? I get to participate in this structure in AA in 3 ways. First of all, I participate in the decision making in concept 1. So when a decision needs to be made on behalf of the whole fellowship, or indeed in my life, if I must be part of decision-making processes. I also get to serve. So the whole of the concepts are about delegation. Delegation to whom? To trusted servants. If there is a servant, there is a master. And the third way in which I can participate is I can help others to serve. The principle behind concept 1 is ultimate wholeness. And when I was drinking, I was internally disintegrated. A friend of mine uh, says that the notion of being Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is rather flattering, suggesting that he'd got it down to two personalities. He said in his case, it was more a case of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. If he could have got it down to two, he would have had a chance. Disintegration and uh, the steps bring about integration so that I'm one person. The traditions, my relationships with others were fractured. Again, the steps and the traditions restore my relationship with other people. The forgiveness in step 4, the confession in step 5, the making of amends in steps 8 and 9, and then the ongoing provision of service in step 12, mend and in some cases establish and certainly foster those relationships. And my relationship with God was non-existent. Now I have to say there are certain times of the day, every day, when my relationship with God is non-existent. I'm not someone who walks through the tulips hand in hand with my Creator every moment of every day. I have to work very hard to keep that connection going, because I just get lost in the world very, very quickly. But the effect of the package deal is to restore my relationship with God. And so that's how I view the, the purpose of the steps, traditions, and the concepts, is to restore that wholeness internally, the wholeness with others, the wholeness with God, which is ultimately the same thing. A friend of mine says that insanity is independence or codependence, and I've played both. So codependence is where I'm excessively focused on your beliefs, thoughts, actions, feelings, an internal and external world, and I'm not paying attention to any of my feelings or thoughts or actions or beliefs, or I'm just totally focused on you. Sanity, a friend of mine says, is interdependence. So we're all part of a family, and we're supposed to be independent. We're not supposed to be operating. Yes, I'm fully self-supporting through my own contributions in order to be part of the network. Mary Oliver says, American poet, says, whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. And that's the purpose of this, is to help me find my place in the family of things. And this is reflected on page 28 of the big book, which is the answer, I think, to low self-esteem, so-called low self-esteem. If what we have learnt and felt and seen means anything at all, it means that all of us, whatever our race, creed, or colour, are the children of a living creator. Children! God has no grandchildren. God has only children. The children of a living creator with whom we may form a relationship upon simple and understandable terms as soon as we're willing and honest enough to try. It's saying the same thing as the Mary Oliver. So in step 3, I turn my will over to God, but then I don't sit there like a potato. God then delegates back to me responsibility and authority for individual tasks. So it's circumscribed. I'm just responsible for the action. I'm not responsible for the result. Just repeat that 3 times in the morning, click your ruby heels, and you'll be back in Kansas in no time. And so whenever I'm disturbed, I'm breaching concept 1 in one of 2 ways. I'm either recognizing the final responsibility and ultimate authority of God, but denying that God has delegated to me some responsibility and authority too. I was upset a few years ago when a tall and beautiful tree in a neighboring plot was cut down. Now, it turned down, it was cut down because it was unsafe and was going to fall on the children at the primary school or something. I mean, I don't believe it, but there we go. That's what they said. And I was upset until I gave an amount of money to a tree charity which planted trees. When I'd made that proxy amend, I could forgive the tree being chopped down. Well, I was disturbed because there was a job for me to do. I needed to find out what my job was. When I'd done my job, I was fine. The other way I can breach concept one is it's the other way around. When I fail to recognize the final responsibility and ultimate authority of God and usurp that final responsibility and an ultimate authority for myself, if you feel any sense of heaviness, it means you're carrying more than you're capable of carrying, which means you're typically uh, trying to hold final responsibility and ultimate authority, uh, which should be God's. Uh, and I love that line. Uh, it's one of those old-fashioned AA things they used to say a long time ago, that God will never give you more than you can handle. Which means that I'm always given the resources to handle what is immediately in front of me. It's the notion of all of the other things that I have to handle, which I don't have to do anything about right now. That is where the weight comes from. The moment can yield pain, but it can't yield weight. Weight is entirely notional. It's the sense of final and ultimate responsibility. And I'm given the resources in the moment that I need the resources. I don't get them in advance. There's, oh, I'm not going to be able to remember it. The Pixar film that came out earlier this year with these kind of blue creatures with the big ears. Onward. I think it's called Onward. Someone with children or grandchildren nod at this point. I think it's called Onward or Upward, something like that. And it's got, I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler, but it's a common enough meme anyway, you'll be familiar with it. The notion of the invisible bridge, where the bridge is there, but you've got to step out over the abyss, and as you step out over the abyss, the reality of the bridge presents itself. But you're not getting any guarantees anywhere along the way. You've got to trust moment by moment by moment. And if I'm trusting in the final responsibility and ultimate authority of God moment by moment, then I'm pretty sure I'm not going to drink any gin for the rest of the day. That's all I've got. Thank you for listening.